Sport, Arts and Culture Minister Zizi Kodwa has officially opened the South African Pavilion at the 18th International Architecture Exhibition in Italy. It will run from this month until November, with the theme being the laboratory of the future. We're now joined by one of the curators at the exhibition, that is Dr. Sechaba Maape, director of the Design Practice on behalf of South Africa there in Italy. Thank you very much, Doc, for your time this morning in South Africa at least. What stood out for you from the presentations that you made there, especially maybe in relation to the reception to your message?
Thank you so much for allowing us to speak. Well, what stood out the most really is that the Biennale is, this year is themed about Africa. The theme is Africa. The curator, Leslie Loco, is Ghanaian British, and she's the first black female architect to curate the Venice Biennale. And we had the biggest contingency of South Africans who are at the Biennale presenting this year. So it actually felt like a South African Venice Biennale. One of the main exhibition spaces, as you walk in, you hear the voice of Thabo Mbeki and many South Africans who are talking about the Thabo Mbeki Presidential Library, which is being designed by one of the biggest Ghanaian architects, Sir David Ajay. So what stood out for me the most is that there are so many South Africans there. South Africa is in the spotlight. There was a pre-opening function where DJ Oskido and Thibaut Touch were in the lineup. And so if you are in Venice, you will feel South Africa is here.
Wonderful. Let's bring it back home. I'd like for us to focus on an article or a thought piece that you penned back in May of 2022. It's under the free blog of your website. So you question this idea of home, and you've titled this opinion piece, "Is my home good or evil?" And I'd like for us to maybe take a look at the conclusion. You say, in closing, "I think asking if my home is good or evil, I am drawing attention to the intentions behind apartheid planning and asking those who identify with the township and say, 'Kasi for life,' if they know the Kasi, really know it. Do they understand what it was designed for? And if some of the challenges they face today are directly related to it? What was the intention of those 4-roomed houses in our townships?"
Yeah, you know, I'm glad you're asking me that kind of stuff. And thank you for reading that work, because I've been trying to communicate to South Africans for a long time, because I work at Wits University and I sit in an office in Wits University, which could have been an office of one of the people who literally designed the apartheid township. So there were a number of men who designed the apartheid township who worked at Wits University and later went on to develop the design at the CSIR during the apartheid era. And now I'm there sitting in those same offices. And when you're sitting in there, you realize that it was a lot of creativity and intentionality that came behind designing the townships in the way that they've been designed. And my question really, you know, can you imagine you've grown up in a township, you grew up in a 4-room house, and then you look at the things that the people were intending on doing who designed them, and you suddenly realize that this was never designed for my thriving. It was always designed to oppress me. And so then, you know, when I think about my friends and myself who grew up in the township and say Kasi for life, and you realize that in actual fact, this same Kasi for life was always something that was meant to oppress us. And you look around and you look at some of the oppression that we still have today, one begins to wonder, was this all for good intentions, or was there evil intentions behind it? And that's really what I'm trying to say. And that's part of a broader question that I'm asking about the cities and the townships that we live in, and asking, are they really for us, especially Black South Africans? Are they really for us, or were they intended for something else? Why do we live in white houses? You know, why do we live in little white box houses? Why are they so square? And, you know, people kind of just evolve the same logic of these houses and make them slightly larger, you know, slightly more comfortable. But it's the same logic that was actually birthed by people who are not trying to do these things for our good intentions. So that's really the question behind that. And it's partly why we're presenting what we're presenting here. I mean, one of the things I'm always talking about is color. Why are our buildings not colorful? You know, when you look at clothing, you look at Marcos's designs, they're so colorful and they're full of pattern. Look at Shoma Josie's clothes and look at Shoma Josie's designs. They're so colorful. Think about, you know, even our music is so colorful. Think about Amapiano. But the moment you look at architecture, it's so far behind in terms of that transformation and it being reflective of our values and some of our preferences as African people. And that's part of the thing that I'm trying to bring to this Venice Biennale.
Because you go further to say, think of your first home, the place where your earliest memories were made, the place where you spent your first few years, your 5th birthday, and made the strongest bonds. In architecture, philosophers and psychologists speak of how home and the establishment of a sense of self are so closely tied together. So there's a psychology to it, because you would even find the also popular peach tree in each and every single home in the townships. Why was that?
Exactly. So when I grew up, we had a peach tree in our backyard and everyone identified with a peach tree. You know, we kind of thought that this is actually us and this is our culture, only to find out that there was a guy who designed in his yard, one of these apartheid spatial planners and architects, literal architects. He, in his backyard, he wanted to map out the square meterage that they wanted to build the 4-room houses. And so he created this mock-up in his backyard. And, you know, he was trying to work out, well, what kind of outside space will it be? And according to the narrative, his, at that time, gardener decided in this mock-up that he created to build a peach tree, if memory serves me correct about this narrative. And so this gardener put there this peach tree, and this man then decided that, oh, we're going to put peach trees in all the apartheid, in all the township houses. And when I heard this was a violation to my identity, because all this time I was identifying with this peach tree as though it's part of my culture. Yet it was actually something that was very much engineered. And so, you know, when your whole world and your whole culture is something that has been engineered by somebody else, and all this time you're identifying with it, you start to wonder, well, what else was engineered about who I am? And, you know, how much is this authentically my culture? How much was it was engineered? And how do I even start picking them apart and trying to figure out what's going on?
And then you come to 2023, South Africa. The National Development Plan, Vision 2030, which is in about 7 years' time, under 7 years. All government domains in collaboration with other stakeholders must plan and manage the new wave of urbanization in cities in a way that contributes to rural development. The Chapter 8 of the NDP addresses the evolution of human settlement and the space economy. The relevance of spatial transformation in addressing poverty and inequality through the eradication of apartheid legacies is emphasized throughout Chapter 8 of the National Development Plan. With just 7 years to go, how far have we come when we speak of spatial inefficiencies being addressed and linking people to development?
We haven't come far enough, and you know, the thing that's quite alarming now is that the spatial inequalities actually somehow work quite well with capitalism and the preferences for capitalism. So take, for example, property markets. You know, if you end up having spatial equality and you have, for instance, low-income earning communities beginning to live within the context of high-income earning communities, what will happen there is it's, you know, most likely going to be a threat to the property market, because people tend to say property values go down when certain demographics and people of certain income come into certain spaces. So in actual fact, right now, the apartheid spatial planning seems to be thriving, or, or at least capitalism seems to be thriving because of that apartheid spatial planning. So you see, the issue is a lot more complex, and apartheid itself was very much a capitalist venture. So these two logics work well together, and to dismantle that is not just simply, trying to deal with certain issues of, moving people. You would have to, for example, buy up land in these so-called affluent communities. Who's going to buy that land? Who's going to release that land? Who owns that land? And then, once you've bought up that land and you've moved people into those places, how are you going to ensure that those places still thrive and people are not moved away from those places? There's no flight, flight of those who are privileged. So it's a complex issue. Apartheid was very systematic. And like I said, I work at Wits University at the School of Architecture and Planning. And some of the people who designed these things were designed. It's not just, didn't just come from nowhere. It was designed. And my whole thing is we need to apply the same level of creativity. Professor Amira Osman, who's right now the president of the South African Institute of Architects, says exactly the same thing, that we have to be even more creative than the apartheid spatial planners in order to undo all of this. So for me, creativity is key. Imagination and creativity is key to resolving some of these issues.
Dr. Sechaba Maape is the director of the Design Practice Architecture, and you can check Architecture out and his opinion pieces on their website. Thank you very much, Dr. Maape, for your time this morning.